What's shaking, cocktail fans? I'm Modern Bar Cart CEO Eric Kozlik. It's my job to hit the road and seek out the best and brightest minds in the spirits and cocktail world so that I can share their secrets with you. This time around, I sit down with Joey Fox of Old Westminster Winery in Westminster, Maryland. He's a certified sommelier and he's incredibly passionate about the world of natural wine. In this video series, we discuss what natural wine is, what makes it so special, and what terms you need to know to be fluent in the language of natural wine. And of course, we taste a few interesting expressions along the way. Enjoy. All right, so we are back with Joey Fox, and tell us a little bit about this bottle that you're about to crack open.
So this is Franc Fizz. Franc Fizz is a really exciting new project that we just did. This is 90% Cabernet Franc from the 2017 vintage that has aged all in stainless steel. In 2019, this year, we got 1 ton of a really fun grape called Marquette. We took this Marquette, the 1 ton, crushed it up, added the fresh juice into this Cabernet Franc, immediately bottled it, and had the secondary fermentation happen in bottle under this crown cap. That's that.
So that's really interesting to me. To step way back for folks, obviously when we're talking about wine, we're talking about a fermented beverage. It's not fermented and then distilled like a spirit would be. It's just fermented, which gives us anywhere from like usually 13 to 17% in a wine. Is that?
I would say you can see stuff as low as 8
Okay.
in like really natural winemakers in cool climates in France. But on average, I'd say between 11 and 14.
11 and 14.
Even up to 16 in California.
Right. So we've got a wine here. So you made a wine the prior year, and then
Two prior
right? You said 2017.
Yeah.
So you had wine, and that was just sitting in barrels, correct?
Stainless steel. It never actually went in the barrels.
Okay, so it fermented in stainless steel. You take it, you bottle it, and then you also dope in some of this fresh juice from the new grape. What was it, Marquette?
Marquette. Yep, it's a French-American hybrid grape variety, which we'll get into hybrid soon.
Yes, yeah, that's another fun part of this. So what happens there, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just trying to like walk my way through this with what I know about wine, but when you add that new juice, all of a sudden new sugar becomes available, right? And so the yeast that's coming in with that sugar, in addition to anything that might be currently in the existing wine, all of a sudden wake up. And they're like, whoa, okay, there's more to eat. We thought it was done, but it's like, kind of like the second course.
Precisely.
And so that is the secondary fermentation you're referring to that's occurring in this bottle.
Yep.
And so I'm guessing the only way we know what ABV this is if you crack open a bottle and then literally measure it, right?
Yeah, or if you can do the math. You can
Okay.
take the ABV of the initial wine, take in the potential, the total sugar volume. I'm not smart enough to get to that total, but our winemaker would be.
Yeah, it is doable. Let's crack it open, give it a taste, and maybe while we're doing that, you could talk a little bit about the appeal of natural wine, and in light of some of these, like, we were talking earlier about these additives.
Yeah.
I'm curious about what the appeal is at the consumer level, like from like an individual person, right? But then also at the program level, at the beverage program level, at our favorite bars and restaurants, because we've been kind of comparing notes on some of the natural wine programs in DC that we're both familiar with.
Yeah. I think it's really important. People are shopping at Whole Foods and heading over to a shop right next door and buying Apothic Red. I don't mean to throw them under the bus, but they're a really prime example of an incredibly popular line that's far from natural. People care about these grass-fed meat and organically grown vegetables, but then they turn the corner and buy highly synthetic, highly processed wines. And there's kind of a divide between that.
It's kind of like, it feels like something that's been going on in the background without us knowing it.
Yeah,
Right.
There's so little information out there. When we talk about natural wine, a lot of natural winemakers don't talk about They don't flaunt that they are natural wine. And there's a whole bunch of ambiguity beyond that. You don't have to say, the only thing you have to put on your bottle is contains sulfites. And even if you don't add sulfites, there's natural sulfites in wine. So that's something you'll see on every bottle. There's a lack of transparency in the wine world.
Yeah, let's talk about sulfites, because I think, you listed, you said that there's like a bazillion different, legal additives that can be put in wine, but that one, sulfites, that's one that I've seen, right? You read a wine label and you see contains sulfites and you're like, meh, okay, they're allowed to sell it, so it must not be that bad for me, right?
Yeah.
And I guess the only time that I've really heard anything about sulfites is like, oh, wine without sulfites won't give you as bad of a hangover. And I kind of use it as like that's my access point, but like, I don't know why. I don't even know what sulfites are, except they start with sulf, and so does sulfur.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I know. So tell me more.
Yeah, so sulfites are a preservative. If you eat dried fruit or ketchup, they're in a lot of different things. To kind of zoom out real quick, wine, I like to think of wine as a journey of grapes turning into vinegar. That's the timeline, the start and the end of it. Wine is this really narrow slither that we have where these grapes taste delicious. Adding sulfur broadens that window by a little bit. You have more leeway. You just have a little more to work with. And all these other additives their goal is to make that window even bigger.
Right. And if you think about that from a business standpoint, like, great.
Yeah.
Awesome, right?
Absolutely.
Especially when, when you start trying to do things like lower the prices on your products to make them more accessible to a wider range of consumers, then that type of decision is very much on the table, because the lower you drop your prices, the lower the cost of your inputs have to be, which means that as a business person, as a person who's making that decision, you don't really want to be losing sleep of like, oh no, like is this the right time to be stopping this fermentation? By broadening that window, you're eliminating risk, which gives you more confidence to be able to lower those prices. So I do understand it from a business standpoint.
Absolutely.
But talk about what sulfites do that we might not like.
In high additives, it just kind of it strips the wine. It takes away its freshness. Because it is a preservative, it'll give you a long-lived wine. So something you don't want to drink for 10 years before it starts to show. But I think the whole natural wine movement is moving to younger, fresher tasting wines that are juicier. And with that comes the farming practices. In order to make these wines more accessible, we're picking the fruit earlier in the vineyard, because we're farming with a lighter hand than conventional. So as a byproduct, these wines are getting lighter, because think about it like a tomato, a green tomato. How often do you see a rotten or infected green tomato versus a really ripe red tomato? When those sugars are really rolling, the critters find their way. So I like to use that analogy.
Right. Yeah. No, it does, and it does make sense. That's really interesting. I like that as a general rule, right? Natural wines will tend to be lighter, and I'm also kind of stuck on what you were saying a moment ago, with sulfites and how sulfites extend the length of a wine. They give you something that's you can age for longer. And I mean, when I was learning my wine, who do you read? You read Robert Parker.
Yep.
What does Robert Parker say? These wines are beginning to show magnificently and will continue to show magnificently for another 5 years. And of course, what we're referring to is some left bank Bordeaux that is already 20 years old.
Yeah.
Right? And so that just kind of struck me as a good thing.
Yeah.
And people, I think people in the wine world say like, oh, that's a nice, you look for those old label statements, and you look for old labels from traditionally good vintages, right? And that seems to be like, well, if you get a good label and you get a good vintage, chances are it's going to be a really good bottle if it was properly stored. But what natural wine is saying is like, well, maybe don't wait so long, and you don't need the sulfites.
Yeah, and even the best made examples that have no sulfur, they can age as well. It's a misconception that natural wine can't age, but as a whole, the movement is younger, fresher wines.
Yeah, and so we've got this the Fizz. What's the
Franc Fizz?
Franc Fizz. So we've got our Franc Fizz right here.
Yeah.
And when you opened it, you had to kind of like let the air out very gradually because it was intensely fizzy.
Yeah.
Can you talk about why that is?
Yeah. So when we calculate to the best that we can the total sugars in the Marquette and how fizzy this end product will be from that secondary fermentation, but it's not a direct science. So we opened it very carefully because all that 10% of Marquette created all these fine bubbles. The byproduct of fermentation is CO2. The CO2, we can see it here. When it gets created, it naturally rises and it looks to escape the bottle. But with a crown cap on it, it has nowhere to go.
Right.
So it reintegrates, and this got a pretty healthy secondary fermentation, leading to a nice fizzy mouthfeel.
Right, and that's the same way they make champagne, right? They add, well, instead of adding extra juice, they just add sugar.
Exactly.
Right, and that's what creates. So that's why it's carbonated, and so that's not with natural wine. That's not necessarily a sign of anything wrong or different about it. It's just kind of like, that's how some of them are made.
Exactly.
So what kind of notes do you usually give on this? I mean,